Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting part 51 of an exciting series. What if Villain Deku became a teacher at U.A? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Bloomer Bill on fanfiction.net. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. Tamaki privately had to admit he was doing better than he thought he would. He hadn't fully lost himself in anxiety over the test, which was better than he expected in all honesty. He had also managed to remain mostly at a low level of general stress with us holding his hand for some time before the test started. And frankly, the collecting of flags was not the worst thing that his mind had thought they would have to do for the test. Tamaki had truly worried that it might require some kind of battle royal between either themselves or pro-heroes. The latter being rather possible, since that was how Sobanana apparently had to get her license. He would still need to steal a flag from another person, but he would likely be able to manage that much. He had a decent time at the salt marsh, slipping through the water until he collected everything, and then he was glad to hide away behind Masao in a corner and eating all of the things that Masao had been given to him, silently accepting the praise from the Hikage-san, Yuchi-san, and Sobanana, waiting for the rest of his friends to come into the waiting room, and was so thankful that Oz had also passed, cuddling with him as they waited for people to fill out the rest of the numbers. Then they got ready to go back out. Oz helping him grab the helpful food items for him to use if the things he had eaten were digested during the next part of the exam. The volcanic disaster was unexpected, but he would be able to help like Masao said he could, and he was actually a little more prepared for this than most. Carefully, with the aid of the bathroom mirror, he remade his mouth into a filter system that would help him keep the ash from getting to his lungs. Deku-Sensei had told him it would be helpful for the future. He also crafted himself a large set of 6 wings. Making his bones hollow was a bit more difficult, but possible, and then he rejoined his friends to leave the waiting area. A wait that wasn't for long, then once he heard the same creaking of the walls about to fall, he leapt with knee-gyre breaking through the walls and flying high up in the air with the beat of his multiple wings and not float. Asterisk left side, or right? Asterisk Tamaki asked in the mind space as they rose. Asterisk, I'll take the right side. Asterisk knee-gyre told him, and then she shot off with a blast of energy. Tamaki nodded to himself and dove straight for the left and began to take note of any visible pockets of wounded civilians. Then flew back into range of the comms Heya made. Arcus, can you hear me? He called as he touched down on a half-fallen skyscraper. Loud and clear, triage is going to be made on the right of the desert area, and we're clearing a landing pad for you and Sparkler. Heya responded. Good. I'll mark one of the maps you made with the denser spots of wounded. Tamaki informed her. Excellent. We can have search teams go to those areas. Heya replied. I'm leaving comms range now. Tamaki warned, leaping back into the air, and then headed for the furthest part of the field, and began to look and help the people there. The first of which was a woman freaking out over a lost limb, and carefully he took the woman in his arms and flew her to the triage center. Heya had sat on top of a beach ship they probably got from the lake area nearby, and using it to boost her signal by pirating the tech inside of it. Oz next to her using his hair to help pass supplies and cradle other wounded for the rest of the examinees. The landing pad wasn't strong to see with the naked eye, with a large pink ring and something to color the sand inside red. Airdrop incoming, one of the other examinees standing at the base of Crow's Nest yelled out, and a pair of examinees came to meet him, taking the woman to help treat her, and he stuck around long enough to tell them her condition before going back out to find more. Carefully helping people out of the rubble and moving large beams that were on fire, turning his limbs to plates of stone to increase his strength and not be burnt, his wings clearing out the smoke in smaller dense areas to prevent smoke inhalation. Even turning his wings into gargoyle-like wings to shield a group of children he found on a field trip from a large pile of falling soot and volcanic ash. Said group he had just finished dropping off and heading back out when the explosion of the wall happened, and for a brief moment his heart dropped. The past users had warned him and knee-gyre of Aoi's previous attacks on them through hired mercenaries, that even public events were not safe from such attacks. And for a very brief moment, he felt genuinely terrified that Aoi not only knew about one of them, but that this fake emergency would become very real very fast. The relief of seeing Best Genist making his entrance was overwhelming. Guys, we need a new triage area stat. Sparkler and Sun Eater find one. Heya ordered over the comms, and Tamaki reluctantly shot through the air looking for a place that they could safely move the civilians. Asterisk, I found a spot, Jiki. Going to show ya. Asterisk, Kato warned, before an image of the field that wasn't lava-covered flashed across his vision. Now that he knew which spot they were resetting up, he got to work moving the people to there instead. Nijire and Masao were handling the cleanup of the new triage. He was able to guide the others to the new area through the easiest path to move them without aggravating their injuries. Even able to get most of them over to the new triage before something happened that made his danger sense flare painfully. Tamaki whipped his head towards where the old triage was, just in time to watch as a small earthquake shook the ground, knocking down a not-too-distant tower of stone, and see Oz lose his footing, causing some kind of silver coil to cut into Oswald's neck and make him bleed. Something snapping in his mind upon seeing the dribble of hot pink coming down, stealing his breath in that moment. Tamaki yanked at many things buried under his skin and felt his body being remolded by all of it. Layers of muscle wrapping over each other and shifting bone cracking and reforming to a much larger frame before being overtaken by interlocked metal scales. His hair giving way to thick tentacles that immediately shot forward and ripping through the many silver and coil-like fabric that Best Genist had been controlling as he launched himself at the man, letting his limbs change even further to be more like Masao's and his new talons dug into the ground where he landed, his new enlarged tail knocking away the remaining sidekicks with the jean-clad hero, allowing him to focus solely on said blonde hero. Some distant part of his mind was still aware that this was merely an exam and that there was no real danger. But Best Genist had hurt Oswald, and it was all because of that stupid silver wire whatever Best Genist had used. Why the hell would he use that at all if he knew it could do something like that? A very wet, gurgling snarl left his mouth as it warped in a tooth-filled maw before he gave chase to the now fleeing hero. Best Genist managing to keep away from him by using fabric strings to swing out of the way of his clawed hands, stopping once they made it to the fallen city, and he got a solid grip on Best Genist with his tail when the man had tried to make a U-turn. He squeezed his grip a little tighter before he slammed the end of his tail and the hero into the ground with enough force to crack the burnt asphalt of a ruined street. Turning around, he leaned down slightly to get a better look of the hero, trapped by his tail. The man was very clearly dazed, no doubt because of the G-forces and perhaps a concussion from hitting the ground that strong. Tamaki knew he hadn't broken Best Genist's ribs since his tail had taken most of the force, and when he shifted his tail slightly, the ribs hadn't felt different. They were likely bruised, though. Best Genist's right leg, though, was not as lucky. Bone wasn't jutting out, but Tamaki could still tell that the leg was unquestionably broken from its angle. Anger giving way to panic, Tamaki loosened his tail, releasing the man. He let go of all of things he unconsciously dredged up, and his body shifting and resettling back to his normal form. Tamaki rushed over to Best Genist's side and knelt down to get a better idea of how bad the hero's broken leg was. Be Best Genist, sir, can you hear me? Tamaki called timidly, and he got a jumbled groan from the man back, mostly a mix of syllables that didn't really form words. Not good? Really not good. At least he was awake enough to answer. Hikage pointed out, and Tamaki nearly jumped, not expecting to hear anyone other than his own anxious thoughts. Hey kid, stop worrying about us and feel up that Gene Fetus's leg, so we know how badly you broke it. Bruce told him. Tamaki nodded sharply, and then carefully felt the leg, Best Genist's leg, jolting, and a hiss came from the barely conscious man. Best Genist trying to pull his leg away, but Tamaki's hand stayed on the man's legs. Sorry, Genist, sir, but I need to see how bad the break is. Tamaki shakily pleaded, and continued to feel the area. Do you feel any little jagged edges? And asked, and Tamaki nodded. How many and where? Hikage questioned. Asterisk mid-calf, and maybe more than 10. Asterisk Tamaki answered, apologizing in his mind to Best Genist as the man continued to groan as he felt the broke part of his leg. Okay, that means it's a comminuted break and either a spiral or compound break on top from how the leg is angled. Hikage commented, and Tamaki felt even worse hearing that. Amajiki, I know you didn't want us to dash, and began to speak, but he cut it off. Asterisk, tell me how to help. Asterisk, Tamaki requested. If Best Genist did have a compound fracture that would have him bleeding on the inside with all of those smaller bone shards. Cut the pants leg away and get a look at the leg proper. Bruce ordered, and Tamaki made sharp metal claws and tore through the jeans. Discolored flesh revealed underneath. Clothes break then. That's good, but that discoloration looks like internal bleeding. Gonna need a tourniquet to keep that at a minimum. Hikage informed him. Tamaki reached into one of his pockets and pulled out something to tie around just under Best Genist's knee. All right, not much more you can do for that leg. Now let's see how bad you can cust him. And told him, and Tamaki was just about to do just that when the screech of an air horn made him flinch. The examiner telling everyone the exam was over and that all of the civilians had been rescued and for the examinees to leave through the designated exits. Asterisk, do you need me to help you move Best Genist Jiki? Asterisk, Nijire asked through the mind space. Asterisk, yes, please help. Asterisk, Tamaki asked, and was unsurprised when Nijire arrived in a matter of moments. Touching down a few feet away, and then she motioned for him to move aside. He didn't need to be asked twice, and Nijire kneeled where he once was. Okay, we're both going to move him. My flying will be smoother, and I just need you to hold up his other side to keep him stable and level. Nijire ordered out loud. Nodding, Tamaki moved his hands to brace the other side of Best Genist, and with a small countdown, they were in the air and flying towards where Best Genist sidekicks were gathered. Well, that was not what I was expecting, Hikage said, running hand through his hair as they watched the group waiting for their results. Yuchi thought that was a bit of an understatement, since he doubted any of them would have expected for Amajiki to fight with the number 3 hero or for the shy boy to actually win and take out one of the top 10 heroes. Yuchi's brat is rubbing off on his cousins more than we thought. Second scoff from where he was sat on his throne. Yuchi somewhat wanted to fight it, but he also knew that Izuku famously threat a hero in public and was more than willing to attack Yagi with whatever he has on hand. To be fair, they both were already proven to hold grudges. And pointed out, and was no doubt referring to the week-long vandalization of Sasaki's apartment carried out by Nijire, Amajiki, and their friends minus Tagoda. And it would be a lie to say they all hadn't greatly enjoyed watching them doing such. True, but that going Eldritch thing was 100% because of Yuchi's brat. Bruce countered. Yuchi opened his mouth to argue, but sighed. Okay, Izuku did do that even if it was originally Tagoda's idea for true chimerism. Yuchi reluctantly had to admit, face-palming. Asterisk, I stop. Not helping. Asterisk, Nijire told them as she rubbed Amajiki's back. The boy's face very firmly pressed into Miyake's back, trying desperately to pretend he did not exist. I'm sorry, but you did great out there, sweetheart. Nana told Amajiki as she rubbed the shade's back. The boy whined, trying to push his face into Miyake's back even more, and moved to also stand by the shades of the knives. Amajiki, I can understand you're worried about what you've done. Most people don't injure one of the top 10 heroes, accident or otherwise, and it will probably affect your final score like you're worried it will. En conceded as he sat next to the worried boy's shade. But failing here will not be the end of the world. You can try again for your provisional license in about 6 months. And license or no, you should take the fact that you can take down one of the top 3 heroes as a comforting one. En told them, Sixer is right. The fact you went after and took out a decades-old pro that's repeatedly stayed at the top on your own, without any of our power to back you up, shows how strong you are, Bruce said, pointing out how impressive the feat actually was. Yuchi wasn't sure what kind of comfort that was supposed to bring Amajiki in this moment, but he could at least appreciate the attempt. How many points could they actually take from the kid for that? Banjo questioned, with a raised brow. Depends. They could be a touch forgiving since he was a villain that serious injured someone and had clear plans to attack others that were injured, or they could just judge him for the injures. Hikage answered. What about failing him outright? Bruce inquired. Doubtful, given the rest of his performance was beyond exceptional, and he stopped the moment he realized Genist was hurt, but not out of the realm of possibility, unfortunately. Nana admitted. Despite her attempts to comfort Amajiki, she was able to be real about the consequences. Is Oswald doing okay? Yuchi asked. Asterisk, I think so. Haruki-sensei brought a taffy back up for Oz, so he'll heal up, but we'll have to wait for him and Yu to come back. Asterisk, Nijire answered, looking around to see if they were back yet, but still hadn't seen either of them. That's good. How much longer until they reveal the results? Yuchi inquired. Nijire relayed his question to Haruki. The tree woman looked around with a hum. We probably won't have to wait for that much longer. Even if they're arguing about what Amajiki did to Best Genist, they would have to wrap it up around now. She answered, then looking towards the board. They can't keep all of us here for too long. 3 hours is already a long time. Haruki added, knowing that Haruki had overseen many decades of the exams back-to-back. Her saying this was rather easy to believe. So there was little more they could do but wait. Not that Nana and Nijire didn't try to comfort Amajiki as best they could during the next 5 minutes. Then the large black screen lit with a series of names and pictures. Nijire's eyes scanned the screen for their names. Jiki passed. Nijire cheered relieved, and Amajiki raised his head to look himself as Nijire got out some of her excitement with a little victory dance. Amajiki was a touch confused but mostly relieved when he saw that his name was indeed on the board and stated that he had passed the exam, with a much smaller number than the others, but still a passing grade. See, I told you that you did great. Nana happily told the boy before hugging his shade. Miyake, thrilled as he looked at the board. It looks like all of us have passed. The others will be proud. Miyake commented, his tail patting Amajiki on the head. Of course they will. Oh, I can't wait to tell Toshi once he finishes his patrol. Nana gleefully exclaimed. Speaking of Yagi, Yuchi looked over to where second was on the other side of the mind space with their eighth. The man, sensing his gaze, looked over to him, nodding his head before focusing back on Yagi. Yuchi turned back to the ninths, his mind more than reassured knowing that second, while Harsh would keep Yagi from overworking himself during patrol, and he was confident in second as a reasonable partner. Nijire was still cheering while Tagoda and Miyake were also celebrated, their whole group passing the exam. Ah, there is Oswald and Heya, Haruki commented, and Amajiki's head shot up. And through Amajiki's eyes they saw as both Oswald and Heya returned, the Pinkette clearly on a mission as he power-walked towards Amajiki. I'm getting the sense we might need to leave for our personal spaces for a little while, Banjo pointed out. Before anyone could reply to Banjo's comment, Oswald reached Amajiki and gripped him by the shoulders and point-blank asked, Did you actually break BJ's leg? And left him babbling like a drunk. Amajiki flushed and sputtered. Yes, he did. Nijire answered for him in a sing-song tone. Oswald took a deep breath, then hugged Amajiki very close. I'm going to spoil the absolute hell out of you once we get out of here. Feed you by hand, and F everything. Oswald promised nose to nose with Amajiki. Naturally, this closeness and the promise of spoiling. Amajiki was red in the face and just buried his face in Oswald's CHSD to hide from the rest of the world. Nana cooed over the two of them, though the rest of them focused more on Nijire to give the two of them more privacy. Can you ask if you can pick up your provisional license yet? Haikage requested of her. Nijire nodded and turned to Haruki, relaying the question. We'll have to wait until they call for us, but I don't think it'll take all that long. I'll inform the others of the good news. Haruki told them, patting Nijire on the head before stepping outside to make said call. We should do something to celebrate. What should we do? Have a little party with everyone or something? Nijire asked, bouncing in place a little. A party might be too much, but we can get a bunch of food and eat with them. Heya responded. That would probably be for the best. Aizawa-sensei could take a nap as well if we do that. Miyake pointed out. Yes, Aizawa-sensei deserves more nappy time. Nijire agreed very seriously, making Heya snort. Do you think Yagi-san will be able to join us? Tagoda inquired. Maybe. Depends on whether or not we can bully him into not overworking himself. Haikage answered. I think we can do that. Chi-Chi will probably want to congratulate us in person. Nijire told them instead, replying to Haikage and Tagoda. And I'll make sure of it. Nana happily exclaimed. It will also be the last time you can meet up and talk about things before the last term of the year starts. In reminded Nijire, some of her excitement dimming as she thought about that. Going back to school is going to be so weird. Nijire muttered. one of her fingers resting on her chin. Heya and Tagoda blinked surprised, sharing the apparent epiphany with equal contemplation. I kind of forgot about that," Tagoda admitted, rubbing the back of his neck, Heya patting his arm. "Well, after everything," Heya said, hesitating and carefully choosing her words as she looked around at the hundreds of people around them, "us just going back to school is going to feel weird, even if we do take up a work-study," Heya assured to the best of her ability. "It is the mundanity of simply going to school, knowing what we do now, that is creating the disconnect in your mind," Miyake helpfully informed them. "The lizard's right," Bruce commented. After years of watching and actively fighting all for one, watching the Ninths going to school and having Eighth taking up teaching of all things will be a major change, Bruce said, letting his head tilt back to stare in the void above. That made Yuichi pause as well. He hadn't thought much about it before now, but Bruce was right. Izuku's plan all, but asked them to step back and let him handle everything, and left them with little more to do than watching their 8th and 9th holders going day by day. It wouldn't all be that boring. Both Nijire and Amajiki were going to become heroes in their own right, and Yagi was working on being a teacher for future heroes for a few years would be more exciting than most people's lives would ever be. But after dedicating everything they had to this secret ongoing war to suddenly just watching a couple of kids doing homework, it would be a very big change for all of them. And looking between most of the others in the mind space, Yuichi could tell the others were also feeling the weight of the idea settling on them. Yuichi had already considered part of this, knowing that soon his brother would no longer be around to fight, but he hadn't thought on what that would mean for all of them after the fight was finally over for good. What would Yuichi do with himself after Aoi was gone? Just exist in this void and watch Nijire and Amajiki going on with their lives. Well, it wouldn't be that different from before. They had watched on, waiting to speak with the next user, and only able to watch on. But now there would be no overlooking threat from Aoi, or even the stigmas that the first 5 of them had to live through and deal with. And new threats were sure to pop up at some point, but without Aoi to influence things, they might not get to the same levels as they had before. Having a little normal will probably be for the best, though, Nijire said, breaking Yuichi out of his thoughts. It'll just give us more time to become who we need to be. Nijire told her friends with a self-assured nod. Tagoda and Heya smiling, while Miyake nodded indeed. We are not adults yet, and should take what little time we have left before jumping into the fray. Miyake agreed. That is a very good way to look at it, Haruki said, apparently having overheard as she returned, placing one of her hands on Nijire's shoulder. Now, let's go over to the booths. They'll be calling us up any moment, Haruki told them, gently ushering them over to where the other examinees had got to previously. Do you think that Haruki will have any good advice for how to pass the upcoming centuries? And asked, given that Haruki was one of the few Centurions they could talk with. Maybe. She hasn't been around as long, but she has been in the world for all of her time, unlike us. Haikage answered, and In nodded. Yuichi didn't voice his own thoughts. Not when Amajiki could have overheard, since he would be respectful of Nijire's choice not to tell him yet about her semi-immortality. But once they were both asleep, and it was just him and the past holders, Yuichi would bring up the idea that Haruki could possibly be the only person that would live on with Nijire in life. Trees could live for thousands of years after all, and if Nijire would be around for 500, then there was a good chance that Haruki would outlive them and be there for Nijire when everyone other than them was going to be gone. Achiko found herself weirdly grateful once the school term had begun. Sure, she had to see her classmates again, but she was so ready to finish the last of her middle schooling so that she could start applying for hero schools. If it also gave her an excuse to avoid Bakugo, then she kept it to herself. Despite the months of knowing about Bakugo and Izuku's past, she felt conflicted on the matter. She was still angry, probably would hold that anger forever if she was being honest. But as time went on, she no longer felt the need to physically punish him for it, and talking with the others had helped her sort out more of her feelings on the matter. It was a bitter pill to swallow in some cases, the talk she had with Inko-san being a real kick to her stomach, as she was once again reminded about how mistreated people could be just for something they were born as. Another pill she had trouble with was how her guard around Bakugo continued to be lowered even as they hung out together. Even while she was continuously ignoring him, she had been keeping a careful eye on Bakugo. partially to make sure he wasn't going to do something behind her back, and privately because she was looking for another reason to re-break his nose. And what did she see from him? Someone actively trying not to be in butt. Yes, Bakugo was crude and wouldn't hesitate to call Izuku an idiot or tease him, but any maliciousness she expected just wasn't there, and the few times things seemed to start upsetting Bakugo or when the boy was becoming heated, Bakugo would just walk away or stop talking and scrolling on his phone, both likely to cool his head before he returned to the conversation, or flatly told them if he didn't want to talk about that anymore. Without the negative signs, though, her defenses were lowered, and then she started to miss him. How she could miss someone that she was angry with was beyond her, but she did. Bakugo was hardly the most charming person she'd ever met, but there was still something nice about having his opinion when they talked about something. The blonde had a critical eye and freely shared his thoughts, more often than not, in a way that would give her perspective of an issue from a different angle. It wasn't even just about hero stuff either. Returning to school, she heard the other girls talking about the usual things and feeling disconnected from them more than ever. She had been through different things, she knew that, and that she might not be able to fully connect with them, what with her different family background and longing to become a hero. Now, though, she wasn't sure she could even have a casual conversation about anything with how different their worlds were. One of her classmates had shown off a new top she bought, and Achiko had remembered what she thought about the top. Maybe it was pretty, and the strappiness of the collar and sleeves might be in right now, but Achiko could never wear something that would reveal so much skin. All too conscious of how badly a touch-activated quirk could screw her over if she didn't keep her arms covered. What if she stumbled across a villain fight by accident that showered her in glass? There were ways of looking good without leaving yourself open to attacks or accidents. Bakugo, and she had talked about it once, and found she really liked the killer casual style that Bakugo had described to her. They didn't always agree, but she at least felt like she could talk with him without having to hold back about her clinical views or feel like she had to pretend that she was more of an airhead just to keep up a conversation outside of her friend group. But knowing that he hurt Izuku in such horrible ways, repented or not, she couldn't just go back to how they were before, which led her to staying up later than she planned to and lying awake in bed after finishing her first week back to school, conflicted over what she wanted to do or how she wanted to interact with Bakugo. Cutting him out of her life wasn't what she wanted, but she couldn't be friends with him again either, though. Neither extreme felt right, and she didn't even know if there was any middle ground to pick either. Acquaintances that ranted each other about random things. Achiko groaned in frustration, grabbing her pillow from behind her head and covered her face with it. Why couldn't she just hate him? That would be so much easier. She spent most of her first week back to school having her wrapped up thinking about just what kind of relationship she wanted with Bakugo. Her frustration mounting, but not that disruptive in her day-to-day life. Well, Gigi held her hand more, but she wasn't going to complain about that. Shaking her head, she readjusted her bedding again, then tried to go back to bed, stubbornly trying to turn her brain off for the night. It worked eventually, and the next day Achiko woke up and was going about her regular morning routine, turning on the radio for her parents to listen to once they came out and join her. Listening as the news station talked about the normal things, what the weather was going to be like that day, and any traffic jams that were to be expected from hero fights that had happened so far. Only to freeze when they mentioned the squabble between two heroes last week. Gang Orca and Shishido were very famous rivals. Everyone knew that. Izuku admitted it was one of Gang Orca's few bad traits, even if the fights never interfered with their professional work. But the key point was that the two were rivals. Achiko would have domed herself with a frying pan if it wasn't heated for not thinking about that before. In a far better mood and already making plans, she finished off breakfast and started texting with Izuku about changing her mind, that she did want to go to the little meetup that Izuku was going to be having over at his house. She was in such a great place now that she was able to eat some of the roasted crickets she bought with only a minimal twinge in her about the wrongness of eating an insect. Achiko took a deep breath as she stood in front of Izuku's door. As confident as she was in what she wanted, now the thought of actually asking was a bit more intimidating. Asking for someone to be a rival wasn't an everyday thing, and she couldn't think of many people that did have proper rivals in their lives. She didn't think anyone would take it too badly. Some confusion maybe, though she wasn't sure Bakugo would agree to it either. On one hand, Bakugo was competitive, and she could see him willing to go along with having someone to compete with in a good-natured way. But on the other hand, there was Bakugo's ED that might have him refuse, mainly because Bakugo might not want to risk the tension or frustration that could build between them, sparking a fit, which would be understandable, though she wouldn't know what to do with herself if Bakugo didn't want to be rivals with her, since going back to stonewalling Bakugo really wasn't something that she thought she could go back to. Shaking her head, she lightly slapped her cheeks and squared her shoulders. She wouldn't get anywhere if she just stood around, and before she could overthink herself out of it, knocked on the door. Not having to wait for long for Izuku to open the door, grinning at first when he saw her, but she could see his initial excitement dim. "Yukai," he greeted uncertainly. Achiko felt bad for making him uneasy, but she needed to keep up her brave face. She nodded her head and then walked past Izuku, her friend allowing her to go inside, but she knew his eyes were on her like a hawk, no doubt ready to act if she tried anything. The others were already there, as she expected. Awakuin and Gigi were sitting on the couch along with Bakugo and the Tokoyamis. Awakuin showing Suddy something on his phone, while Fumikage and Jiki seemed to be talking with Bakugo lazily watching on. Gigi being the first of them to notice her, and the others were quick to follow. "Hey Yukai, I didn't know you were coming." Awakuin's greeting trailed off as the tension in the room rose to a dramatic degree. Achiko, unlike usual since the reveal, did not avoid eye contact and completely ignore Bakugo's existence. Instead, she was staring him down and very firmly focused on him. And Bakugo had met her gaze unwaveringly. With measured steps, she walked forward and stood right in front of Bakugo, not breaking eye contact with Bakugo, though she did notice how Bakugo's hand was lightly clenching the arm rest it was resting on. Mentally, she took one more breath to steel herself, mentally going over what she planned to say to him. "I've done a lot of thinking since you told us how you abused Izuku," she told Bakugo, ignoring how the Tokoyamis and Izuku winced at her brashness of saying it outright. "And?" Bakugo questioned with a single raised brow. "And I cannot in good conscience ever be friends with someone who has hurt my friend in such egregious ways," Achiko replied. Bakugo merely nodded, not surprised in the slightest by her response. Her constant cold shoulder, no doubt more than enough of a hint that she wanted nothing to do with him in everyone's mind. "I am, however, willing to be your rival," Achiko stated, crossing her arms. Aside from a small squawk from Suddy, the rest of the room seemed stunned into silence by her out-of-nowhere offer. Bakugo himself blinked as he stared at her with a WTH face. "I can see that you're trying to change and that you're holding yourself accountable, but that will only go so far. So, I want to be the person that challenges you and meets you slide for slide and drives you into being a better version of yourself," Achiko explained, trying her best to describe the idea in her head. She wasn't going to try and change how Bakugo cursed like a sailor, or that he was a touch more violent with his affection than most people were. Those things weren't bad traits on their own, but she'd be there to knock him on his, but if he ever backslid, or knock him on the back of the head if he crossed a line. To hold his feet to the fire until she felt like he truly atoned for all that he did. "You told us you want to be held accountable for all of the things you did to Izuku the day you told us. Well, this is me calling you on it," she commented, then offered him her hand. "So, Bakugo Katsuki, will you accept me as your rival?" Achiko asked, a small well of anxiety pooling in her guts as Bakugo silently thought over what she told him, his face remaining rather stone-like as he hopefully considered her offer in earnest. Then he took her hand and shook it. "Rivals," he replied with a nod before crossing his arms. Achiko was a touch surprised that Bakugo hadn't scoffed or sked, that he had answered so seriously and frankly maturely to her sudden declaration. But his seriousness made her CHSD feel warm, and she couldn't stop herself from grinning. That he respected and believed in her enough that he didn't even playfully or mockingly question whether she could keep him in line. "Rivals," Achiko promised with a nod of her own. Ain sighed as she walked into the main building of UA. Today was going to be her first day proper and be working as a Samu-san's teaching assistant, making sure to show her employee ID badge since she had come in civilian clothing. She could have worn her hero costume, but right now she wanted to try teaching as a civilian before mixing in any kind of hero worship elements into it. Her ranking had gone way farther up than she ever expected for it to. She wasn't ever sure how she jumped up to the upper 300s basically overnight, but it certainly made her a touch more self-conscious. Plus, Aina knew that the students at UA greatly valued Midoriya's opinion, and that the boy wasn't shy about talking her up from what Isamu-san had mentioned to her in passing. So, showing up as 13 might have ended up with her feeling more pressured than anything else. Still, she made sure to dress up professionally. A black bodysuit top under her pinstripe, blue button-up, a pair of cargo shorts, and black leggings underneath. And she wore some decent boots and thicker LTHR gloves that went up to her elbows, nothing that wouldn't restrict her movement and extra protection from her quirk going off. Ainen was sure that she was going to be fairly active just from following Isamu-san around the main building, but Isamu-san already told her that they'd be watching over a rescue scenario at one of the training areas. She'd be helping out even more with a first-year exercise before that, too. Climbing to the second floor, Ainen easily followed the black lines on the molding until she was in front of Isamu-san's homeroom classroom. Isamu-san had asked her to meet him there rather than one of the teacher's area. So, she knocked on the door, gently tapping the door with her foot since she wasn't sure softly stomping would be heard through the doors here. Then entered the room. Looking around, the classroom was mostly empty. Isamu-san was standing at the podium, but one of the students were also in the room. The Mineta boy, if she remembered his last name from his first-year festival correctly, was sitting at one of the seats idly on his phone. Isamu-san moved his head slightly towards her and then motioned for her to come fully inside. "Good morning, Kuro-san, come on in," Isamu-san said. Ainen complied and walked over to his side, slightly nervous despite knowing what they were going to be doing today. "Kuro-san, this is Oswald-san. He's one of the wards of UA and is in my custody until the dorms are finished. You'll see him before class quite a lot," Isamu-san told her, motioning towards the boy. The pinkette gave her a lazy wave without looking up from his phone. Izuku had told her about the ward system and that there were a handful of students currently in the ward system. She also took note that Isamu-san used the boy's first name. "Now, here's the worksheet we'll be handing out today," Isamu-san informed her as he offered her multiple papers. Ainen took the papers and looked through them, finding more than one question she would expect for returning students at any school, like what they had done over the break, but more heroics-related ones as well, such as if they had kept up with their training or had any new insights about how they wanted to train for their chosen branch of heroics. Which made sense. From what Ainen had read about second year's last term of the year, it was focused on finalizing which of the branches the students wanted to go. Mainly, so their last year would go over more smoothly in the transition from their last year in high school to being adults trying to make it as pro heroes. Some branches were harder to get into than others, and the resources for becoming certain types of heroes were wildly different from others. Like how those in Ops would benefit from the basic medical training taught to rescue heroes like herself, but find the marketing talks to boost popularity for limelight heroes all but useless. Learning all of this was a tad overwhelming, even for her to wrap her head around, so it was no doubt for the best that the students were given their whole last year to prepare themselves. "I won't have you doing much during homeroom. Most of your energy will be saved for the first year's training exercise later today," Isamu-san explained to her. And there would be the main source of her anxiety today. Ainen gently played with her fingers. The first years would be dealing with what was called in the curriculum as a hero call-out scenario, where the first years would be called out to one of the randomly picked training grounds, and then facing them with 3 things that the students might not be expecting out in the field. Ainen would be playing one of those 3, and she wasn't so sure in her acting abilities. She hadn't thought that she'd be playing any acting roles as a teacher. She had spent the last week or so practicing just for that, actually. "There's no need to worry yourself that much. You'll do fine, Kuro-san," Isamu-san told her, softly placing his hand on her shoulder. Ainen sighed and took a deep breath, trying to take Isamu-san's word to heart. "Thank you, Ur-san," she replied, still feeling somewhat on edge with what she was supposed to do. Thankfully, she didn't have to stew in her nerves for long as the rest of the 13 students in Isamu-san's current class entered the classroom. Mainly because in all of her worrying, she had nearly forgotten that Miyake, Gang Orca's intern, was in the class, and not easy to miss being such a large reptilian person. especially an orange one. Ainen's eyes lit up upon seeing the boy. She knew that Gang Orca had reached out on some of their threads on the Hero Network asking for some help in training his intern Koi for the provisional license exam. She didn't have the time to help herself, but she had seen the posts from the wild pussycats after they had helped him out, mainly cute pictures of one member's nephew playing with him. They were adorable, but they had all seemed to like the kid and high hopes that Miyake would make it in the rescue hero circuit. Gang Orca was also very proud of how his intern was coming along and happily talked about Miyake, including his hopes that Miyake would be coming back to have his work study with him. "Good morning, class. I'm sure you've noticed there is someone else with us today." Isamu-san greeted once everyone was sitting at their desks, gesturing over to her. "This is Kuro-san." Isamu-san introduced her, and Ainen waved to the students. "She will be my teaching assistant this term. If you have any questions regarding rescue work, feel free to ask for her after classes," Isamu-san informed them. "Now, while Kuro-san hands out your worksheets, show of hands for those of you that have read and considered the booklet I assigned to you last term," Isamu-san requested, and Ainen was quick to start passing the worksheets. Hours later, Ainen held her breath as she removed her gloves and tops, focusing very HRD on not letting her quirk loose as she put on the special gloves made by Maijima-san for these exercises. Exhaling, Ainen was so thankful she hadn't destroyed her clothes and put back on her button-up and the protective vest Maijima-san made for her as well. Done getting redressed, she walked out of the dressing room, where 3 of the third years were waiting for her, each wearing a number. 2 in their hero costumes, and the last in spare civilian clothes. "All right, are we ready to go out there and get this exercise started?" Ainen inquired. "Hi, Kuro-sensei." The 3 replied to her. "Okay, Torai-san, where do you want to start out for the first years to rescue you?" Ainen asked, pulling up the map. Torai, the student in civilian clothes, pointed to the bridge. "Fijian said he'd tie me up and leave me to dangle over here." Torai answered. "All right, Ainen could work with that. Speaking of, have you two decided who between you both will play the active villain and the reluctant villain?" Ainen questioned. The 2 nodded. "My quirk makes me a better target for reluctant villainization," Fijian replied, speaking of how their quirk allowed them to bend and warp most metals. "Then I think it's time for all of us to get out there," Ainen stated with a clap of her hands. Walking with the 3 out into the training grounds, it was a mostly urban area with a river running through it. 2 of the students heading to the bridge over it, and the last of them running off to start some kind of havoc. She, herself, made her way to an abandoned building to wait for herself to perhaps be confronted by the first years. There wasn't a guarantee that the first years would be smart enough to realize one of the 2 villains were having their hand forced. Whether they did or not would be noted, and their studies for the next year would reflect it. If none of the students knew or found out about Ainen as the person forcing Fijian's hand, then they wouldn't be told and have a heavier focus on villains or criminals that are forced into crime. They would also focus on it for the next term either way, but if it didn't occur to the students to question a villain's motives in the first place, then it was clear that it was even more important for the class to have the subject brought to their attention. So, depending on how socially aware the kids were, she might need to fight it all, but given the speech that Haku had given, Ainen severely doubted they wouldn't find out about her. And that was proven 10 minutes after the exercise began. A group of the first years burst through the doors. Haku, Goldman, Gromova, and Chin were the ones that came in, Chin using her legs to cut straight through the doors and allowing Haku and Gromova to kick them open. "Asterisk, all right, you can do this, Ainen. You're a cool, calm, and collected villain." Asterisk, Ainen told herself in her mind, then proceeded to try and greet them like she had practiced. I thought I'd get myself a bit more time," she commented before she pointed her hand at one of the crates. "Oh well, a few hero brats won't cause me that many problems," Ainen mockingly said, activating her quirk and swiping her arm towards the students. With sudden pull from her quirk, it sent the crate, and a few barrels accidentally were pulled along to be launched at the group of 4. She hadn't done this much before, hadn't even considered the idea of using her quirk like this before Midoriya had mentioned it during one of their talks. And the idea of using her quirks pulled to toss around lighter things didn't seem that HRD on paper. It was much harder in practice. Hence, accidentally throwing the barrels too. But the kid seemed more than prepared to deal with that, thankfully. Gromova leapt forward and gave a shout, the sound wave canceling out the crate and barrel's inertia. letting her other classmate Chun cut straight through the crate since that was still heading towards them. Somehow, I highly doubt that. Haku stated with a grin before charging forward, gliding over the floor with electricity crackling all over her, and quickly closing the distance between them. Ainin could tell that the girl was going to come in with an attack to her. Haku was still young, and while she had some more training than the average student, her moves were still easy to predict. Which was why, even though Ainin wasn't the best trained in combat, she was more than able to catch Haku's leg when the girl aimed a kick at her, tossing the limb before the girl could try and shock her. Losing control over her arms, even for a few seconds, was not an option. However, the kids were sneaky. Then she realized, as with her attention being fully on Haku allowed Gromova to get in close without her noticing. Gromova unapologetically opened her mouth widely and hissed loudly at her, freaking her out and making her stumble as she stepped back. Gromova using her tail to trip her up, and Haku and Goldman tying her hands up with some kind of tape when they were up in the air. Before Ainin could think of how to get out of their capture attempt, Gromova tackled her, and since she was still unbalanced, the two of them fell to the floor quite roughly. The two holding her hands bound, being yanked above her head, and Chin was quick to place her foot at her neck, leaving her bound and unable to move rather effectively without the risk of hurting herself. Ainin merely laid there shocked for a moment, surprised at how well they had worked together to take her down. Even if she wasn't traditionally trained in combat, since she went to a rescue-focused smaller school, Ainin hadn't thought she would be taken down this fast. Well, you have anything to say for yourself, or should we just read you your rights? Haku asked, grinning down at her. The sound of an air horn prevented Ainin from even thinking about answering and signaled the end of the exam. Gromova getting off of her and Chin moving her leg away from her neck and carefully cutting through the tape. The two girls helping her stand back up. Is your head okay? I couldn't see from where I was if you hit your head or not. Haku asked, coming up to her side along with Goldman, the boys silently taking her hands to see if there was any damage. Ainin smiled towards them, feeling tickled at the four students' concern. I'm fine, you all did great, and my head didn't hit the ground that strong. Just a love tap, I promise. Ainin assured the kids. Now let's head back to the observation area. I'm sure the others are waiting for us, so we can talk about how well you all did. Ainin added a moment later as she motioned for all of them to follow her out of the warehouse, taking note of how little damage they had done and hoped that it would be added onto their final grade for the exercise. Sitting half collapsed and taking very deep breaths on a random bench, Iiro had to consider that his mom might be right about him pushing himself too much too fast. He hadn't been a runner before, and taking a miles-long and cross-prefecture trail was probably way too strong for a beginner, especially if feeling how his heart was thumping so strong in his CHSD was anything to go by. Iiro didn't know you could hear your heartbeat, but that was kind of cool. He'd need to better pace himself next time for sure, though, and maybe pick a shorter trail. Geez, he was more out of shape than he thought he was. Well, Iiro knew that he completely crashed after his sprint after Haku-senpai, and Iiro knew that he would have to work on his stamina for his future hero work. Hence his half-thought plans to start running this trail. At least Iiro had brought enough water and snacks to not feel completely dead on his feet. Speaking of which, Iiro moved and searched around in his backpack to get one of his water bottles, and upon seeing his last bottle half full, decided he'd need to make a pit stop to get more. There would be no way for him to make it home from the neighboring prefecture without another 3 bottles of water. So, after another 5 minutes of sitting and recovering what energy he could, Iiro took his phone and searched up local small shops or a local gas station where he could get more supplies. Picking the closest one, Iiro forced himself to his feet and headed over to the little corner shop, and was also blown over by the air conditioner inside. Oh, that felt so good after working up a sweat. So Iiro basked for a moment before heading over to the section of the shop that had the big fridges and started to look for some good-sized water bottles. They couldn't be too big, otherwise they would weigh him down. Finding what he needed, Iiro started heading towards the checkout, and after a brief conversation with the cashier, Iiro walked back out of the shop. Iiro feeling just a touch better, Iiro began stretching again. He was absolutely feeling sore, but he also a little proud of himself for even making it out this far on his own. He had always wanted to be a hero, but recent events had added fuel to the flame when he was at his lowest. After he just froze up when he should have acted, he felt really, really down on himself and couldn't believe that he ever thought that he could be a hero. Then by chance he saw the news about someone his age being held hostage by a slime quirk person, and watched on with awe as another boy his age rushed in and defused the whole situation. The boy rushing in without fear, and so admittedly defending the slime, quirked boy from the heroes on scene. Iiro couldn't help wanting to be like the green-net boy, and knowing that he was just an ordinary person like him relit his longing afterwards. And seeing Haku-senpai's speech at the festival again brought even more of his longing back. Watching a festival of the students do it all, without their quirks, made him feel even more hopeful. A hope that drove him to chase after Haku-senpai when his only change he'd to ask her if she thought he could be a hero came. And it was Haku-senpai's words of encouragement that really helped him with his resolve. Having her take two of his biggest concerns and doubts and just toss them out the window, so casually along with Haku-senpai's calm certainty that she would be seeing him around you, at grounds made him feel so much more confident. Probably too confident if Iiro was being honest, but that was better than not being confident. Finishing his stretches, Iiro was ready to start running back home when he heard something that made him pause. "Come on, buddy, it won't be that strong," someone snide said in a way that just screamed wrong in Ijiro's ears. Looking around, Iiro wondered if he actually heard that, and his eyes landed on a small group of 3 people to the right of him. But the longer he looked, the more familiar and gut-twisting Iiro suddenly felt. Because it wasn't 3 people hanging out, it was 2 brunette guys cornering a third purple-haired guy. They actually had the third guy all but pinned against the wall, with said person pressing himself against the wall to avoid touching them. "I'm not doing that," the purple-haired guy hissed back, clearly uncomfortable. "But buddy, all you have to do is dash." One of the 2, the one with horns, began clearly trying to persuade the third, but before he could finish, Iiro shouted out without really thinking, "Dude," startling the 3 of them, and when they looked over at him, where Ijiro's mind promptly blanked on him. He'd never done something like this before, and he wished he had even half of a plan of what he should do next to get himself and the corner guy out of this situation. Gosh, I didn't mean to do this. Then his eyes lit up as he got an idea, and he rushed forward, lightly pushing one of the guys away in the process. "I'm sorry about being late," Iiro said with a laugh. He hugged the purple-haired guy and whispered into his ear as quietly as he could, "Just play along." The guy was stiff but clearly preferred Iiro over the other 2 as he half-heartedly hugged Iiro back. "It's fine," the guy replied, not fighting when Iiro proceeded to wrap an arm around his waist. "It's so not. It's been so long since I've seen you in person, dude, and when I finally get the chance, I'm late. So not manly of me." Iiro responded as he quickly walked away from the other 2 guys with the purple-haired guy in tow. Thankfully, the 2 brunette guys seemed so surprised by him swooping in to do anything before Iiro and his friend got away from them. "Thanks for waiting for me, dude. Now come on and tell me what's been going on with you. Has your math teacher been just as much of a dash?" Iiro said, trying to keep up the ruse as the 2 of them walked away from the store. Once they walked a few blocks and couldn't see either of the 2 guys following them, Iiro stopped talking and took his arm off of the guy. "Okay, I think we're all clear. Sorry about getting in your personal space, dude, but you look super uncomfortable back there," Iiro said, rubbing his neck as he apologized. The guy frowned but shrugged. "It's fine, thanks, though," he replied. And then the 2 of them were kind of just standing together, not really sure what to do next, which was kind of awkward. Iiro bit his lip and looked around, spotting a vending machine. "Hey, do you want a soda? I've got some cash," Iiro offered, pointing towards the vending machine. Purple blinked, staring at him. A bit surprised. "You don't have to do that," Purple told him, but Iiro waved the guy off. "It's no problem, dude. I need to get something myself. What do you want?" Iiro asked, taking out his wallet. Purple hesitated before pointing the strawberry milk drink. Iiro nodded, putting the money in and getting himself one too. "Here, and I'm Kirishima. What's your name?" Iiro said, introducing himself, as he offered the first of the strawberry milks. Purple took the bottle and quietly offered his name, Shinso. "Nice to meet you. I'm not from around here. So, do you know any good places to eat around here?" Iiro inquired. He knew he was probably overstepping, but he got the feeling that what he just interrupted wasn't just a one-off thing for Shinso, and the idea of just leaving him to deal with it didn't feel right either. Shinso hadn't answered right away, and Iiro couldn't exactly blame him, since he was being way more friendly than he normally would with a random stranger. There's a cat cafe down the street. It has decent coffee. Shinso eventually muttered back. Iiro grinned back. That sounds great. Do you know if they have any big ones? The Maine Coons. My mom used to have one, and she loved to have pictures of them. Iiro inquired a bit excited. Shinso's fingers tapped his bottle, and he looked away from Iiro. Yeah, they do. An old stray they adopted a couple years ago. He's got a chunk missing from one of his ears. Shinso answered. Dude, that sounds just like Mom's old cat, Trigger. Oh, I have to go see him. Can you introduce me to him? Iiro asked, even more excited. Shinso again seemed surprised, I guess. I was going to head there anyways. Shinso told him, and Iiro mentally first pumped. Great, let's go. Iiro said, following Shinso down the street, texting his parents that he was going to be out longer than he thought, promising to send them some pictures of the cafe he was going to visit. The main CN at the cafe was adorable, and he didn't have the same colors as Trigger was, but his mom loved the pictures regardless. Asterisk, God, this hell run isn't getting any better. Asterisk, Iiro thought as he staggered his way to the cat cafe, like he had every time he ran the long trail to the neighboring prefecture. All of his limbs protesting moving at all. Though he supposed that was really all on him for coming back so soon, he'd been visiting nearly every other day. However, as he stumbled in the cat cafe and saw Shinso sitting in the playpen corner, a good chunk of his aching felt worth it. Iiro made sure to order something before he headed over to the corner and softly called out, "Hey, Shinso, how are you doing?" Shinso didn't look up and just hummed back, busy playing with the white Himalayan's paws to answer properly. Which was fine. In the last month he'd been hanging out with Shinso, he'd come to realize that Shinso was a quiet guy and didn't even speak some days. Iiro didn't mind carrying the conversation those days, or just quietly playing with the cats alongside Shinso those days. Upon flopping on the ground near Shinso, the old main sin of the cafe, Captain, matched on over to him and made his home on Ijiro's back, openly purring as loudly as he could. "Hey, Captain, missed you too," Iiro said, chuckling as he felt even better with the vibrations of the purring running through his body. Captain meowed back and started making biscuits on his back, and Iiro pushed his phone over to Shinso. Shinso rolled his eyes, but obliged to Ijiro's silent question, taking a video for his mom to see. The two of them spending another silent hour together before Iiro began to pack up his stuff to start his run home, waving to Shinso as he left, and Iiro getting a wave back in return. Come the weekend, Iiro planned to take a break from the running, and then he took the train to the next prefecture with the hope of hanging out with Shinso for the day. Shinso always seemed to be at the cat cafe, and today was no different. "Hey, Shinso, great minds think alike, huh?" Iiro said as he settled down in the corner with his friend. Captain abandoning Shinso's lap to lay in Ijiro's, causing Shinso to scowl at the betrayal. "Sorry," Iiro apologized, scooting closer, so Shinso could still keep petting Captain. Shinso seemed to be having another quiet day, since he didn't speak today, even after a couple hours of sitting around and loving on the cats that would come up to them. After the third hour, though, Shinso surprisingly spoke up. "I'm pretty sure there are cat cafes in Chiba," Shinso pointed out. Iiro took a moment to recalibrate his brain, since he hadn't expected Shinso to say anything. "Yeah, we do. There's actually one really close to where I live, and my mom goes there every day after work. They got a new litter of kittens recently. I think I have pictures, actually," Iiro replied, digging in his pocket for his phone to show Shinso. "But you come all the way over here to pet cats," Shinso said sarcastically, raised eyebrow and all. Iiro huffed. "Of course not. I come to hang out with you. The cats are just a bonus," Iiro playful corrected him. Shinso, though, frowned. "I don't even talk to you half the time," Shinso told him. Iiro blinked. Yeah, but you don't have to. Just chilling with you here is nice. And when we do talk, it always pretty cool, like about that documentary you showed me on your phone was so good." Iiro replied, grinning, as he thought of the old dinosaur documentary binge they went on. "Friends don't have to talk all of the time," Iiro pointed out. Shinso scoffed at him. "You barely know anything about me." Shinso spat back. Ijiro's smile dimmed some, but he brushed Shinsu's jab off. Yeah, but friendships have to start somewhere, and I don't mind you telling me about yourself in your own time. Ijiro responded good-heartedly. Shinso looked back at him exasperated. My quirk is brainwashing. People respond to me, and then I can control them. Shinso flatly told him. Ijiro blinked, his mouth falling open. Oh, dude, that's cool. Ijiro exclaimed, there's so much you could do. You could stop so many hostage situations or bank robberies. God, your quirk would make you such a good hero. Ijiro excitedly said, practically beaming at his friend. Shinso, though, sat there wide-eyed and his mouth slightly open. Meet a hero? Shinso asked, completely in disbelief. Totally. Well, mostly you definitely need to build up some muscle first because heroes need to do a lot of groundwork. Your quirk will be so much more useful for a hero than my hardening quirk as a hero. Ijiro answered, causally waving at Shinso's lanky form compared to his own. Shinso just kept staring at him. Wait, dude, do you want to be a hero too? Bro, Ijiro happily asked and hugged Shinso, who sputtered back, not expecting the hug. We should totally try out for you. Together. We can train together for it, and everything. Ijiro proclaimed as he pulled away, holding Shinso by the shoulders with a massive grin, just thinking about. Shinso hesitated. Ijiro tilted his head, waiting for Shinso to finish his sentence. You think I could make it into you? A's hero course? Shinso asked, his voice sounding delicate. Ijiro grinned back at his friend. Of course, we both will. You're so smart you'll definitely pass the written exam. We just need to make sure that you'll pass the physical part, and I'll help do that, Shinso. Ijiro promised, taking Shinsu's hands in his. So, what do you say? Do you want to try and be heroes together? Ijiro asked, perhaps being a touch too eager. Shinso just stared at him like someone had knocked the wind out of him. Then Shinsu's hands squeezed his back. Yeah, let's be heroes together. Shinso agreed. Hey, Tweety, do you think you can slip away for one night? Zuri asked Hawks one day, when they had met up one Tuesday. He had nearly choked on the rabbit he'd been eating at the time. Why? He asked back, confused and a touch concerned. Was this going to be a part of Zuri's plan to free him? He hadn't thought that Zuri's plan would be put into motion so quickly. Next week on Tuesday is going to be the last day of the Dead Festival, Dia de los Muertos, and I would love for you to come join the rest of my friends to celebrate it at the south side. Zuri informed him. Hawk's mouth fell open slightly, a soft thump coming from losing his grip on his prey out of his surprise. You want me to come with you? Hawks asked, even more shocked about Zuri asking him to join him and the rest of his friends. Zuri's beaming smile and nod would have made his wings flutter if they were on his back. But how will we get there and back? I could fly us, but Hawks questioned once he remembered how far the south side was from Kumamoto. Zuri chuckled and patted his arm. You don't need to worry about it, Tweety. Just come here straight away, and I'll get you there and back without anyone noticing. Zuri promised him with a wink. So, do you think you can sneak away for a night? Zuri asked again. Hawks had never agreed faster in his life. He'd spent the rest of the week thinking about this special day trip he was going to have, especially since he had no idea what would be expected of him when Zuri picked him up. Or, what would Zuri's friends think of him? Somehow them not liking him put a larger stone of worry in his stomach than the idea of them figuring out he was Hawks. Zuri's friends clearly knew of Zuri's work since they would all be meeting at the south side, but would they really be comfortable with Zuri hanging out with someone like him? Well, 5 years wasn't the biggest age gap, and both of them were legally adults, but they might not feel the same way. And what if he freaked them out with how he ate? Not everyone would be comfortable with him eating live animals, and it took Zuri a while to stop flinching himself. What would he even wear? The jeans and hoodie that he normally wore probably would not be appropriate for this festival. He hoped he'd be able to talk with Zuri about it before they left. Maybe Zuri would have it all planned out and everything ready for him. Hawks really hoped so. Different variations of these thoughts swirled in his mind and made him nervous, though he was also excited at the thought of having fun with Zuri and his friends. Would the Day of the Dead Festival be like Halloween? That was the only holiday he actually experienced before he was bought by the commission. He doubted it, though. Zuri would have just called it Halloween then. Leaving to pace uncertainly as he waited for Zuri to arrive the following Tuesday, little chirps and clicks leaving his mouth as he allowed himself to worry out loud. "Tweety," Zuri called out, fast approaching him from deeper in the woods around them. Hawks didn't hesitate to wrap his arms around Zuri, chirping as he nuzzled Zuri. The boy hugged him back. "Hi," Zuri said with a giggle, nuzzling him back before Zuri tugged him towards the woods. "Come on, I have someone with a teleportation quirk that's going to help us get there and back," Zuri informed him. Hawks couldn't say he was surprised about Zuri having connections to someone with access to a teleportation quirk. It certainly made sense of how he got around like he had. And watching the swirling black and purple mist made his brain light up, especially when he saw the occasional white speckles. "Make sure to hold your breath," Zuri told him right before they both went through the misty portal, the familiar scent of ozone hitting him, the mist rolling over him the same way clouds had the few times he flew through them. Well, it was less wet than a cloud, and his stomach flipping from the sensation of being displaced before his feet found the ground again. He had steadied himself rather easily, his training helping him stay on his feet, and then he looked around, finding himself standing in a decently looking lobby with Zuri holding his hand. "You okay, Tweety? I know that the portal doesn't agree with everyone," Zuri asked, a bit concerned. "Oh yeah, I'm fine, been hit worse by Gulf streams in the air, Zuri." "But where are we?" Hawks reassured before looking around again. He couldn't see far outside the windows, but he could see quite a lot of orange and yellows. And was that music outside? It was strong to make out. "This is the lobby of my apartments in the south side. I could have dropped us off outside. No one here really cares about that, but I thought you would appreciate getting dressed somewhere more private," Zuri told him, then motioned for him to follow after him, bringing Hawks to a bathroom and giving him a bundle of clothes, motioning to use one of the stalls so he could change. Hawks took the clothes and then walked into the stall. They were mostly black in color with neon red, orange lining the trim, and the back sporting blue highlights, making the patterns of birds, flowers framing the skull depicted there. He didn't find a hat, so he could probably keep wearing his beanie. He also didn't find another mask, so he kept on his current mask while walking out of the stall. Zuri surprisingly had a case of makeup case spread out on the large, conjoined sinks. Wearing his own bright clothes, his eyes especially drawn to the shiny black and green of Zuri's short cape before Zuri spoke up. "You look great in that, Tweety. Now come over here so I can paint your face. It's non-toxic, so you don't have to worry about eating any of it later," Zuri told him, waving for him to come over. Hawks' eyes widened, and he hesitantly went over, kneeling so Zuri could have better access to his face. Zuri quickly removed his mask and grabbed a palette of black and white paint, then started using a brush to begin coloring his face in the slightly chilly wet paint. "Once we're done, we're going to meet up with my friends, Aways, Uraraka, and Shoji. Though Uraraka prefers to be called Yukai, and Shoji will probably tell you to call him Gigi," Zuri informed him as he spread the paint over his cheek. "Everyone is currently getting ready for the parade. We're going to watch that before heading to the shrine and clean up the cubbies there and having a meal together," Zuri stated, moving on to Hawks' eyes. "I've already got the rabbits prepared for you, and if you want, we can have some candied skulls too." Maimsan shared a fantastic recipe for candied skulls, and we were even able to put some mice in some of them, Zuri enthusiastically told him. "Will they be okay with me eating in front of them?" Hawks timidly asked, particularly because of what the answer would be, and the other half because he was worried speaking would mess up the makeup that Zuri was doing. Zuri paused for a moment. Oh, the live prey thing. They won't mind. Yukai is still a bit squeamish about the live animals thing, but no one here is ever going to judge you for eating live in the South Side. You are far from the only carnivore here," Zuri informed him, waving his hand dismissively. "Now don't talk. I don't want to mess up the details on your face," Zuri warned him. Zuri then presumably added the details, layering on paint on top of each other. "All right, I'm done. What do you think, Tweety?" Zuri inquired, letting go of his face. Hawks' eyes opened, and upon looking in the mirror, he started chirping when he saw the white skull painted over with black, filling the gaps and covering most of his face, with bold red lines on his cheeks and under his eyes. Bright blues dotted on his face as well, all of which looked rather pleasing to his eyes. "I'll take that as a yes," Zuri said with a chuckle. "I'm glad. With this face paint you won't have to worry about being recognized without your mask on," Zuri told him. Hawks' eyes widened. not realizing that had been the reason why Zuri had painted his face, but looking back in the mirror, he indeed find it strong to recognize his face as his own. Face painting is common for the festival, so no one will look at you, and I didn't want you to have to hide behind a mask when you meet my friends or anyone else tonight. Zuri further elaborated before he started to paint on his own face. I wasn't able to look up the Day of the Dead festival on my own, so what will we be doing exactly? Hawks asked, unsure if he should offer to add the face paint to Zuri's face in return. He'd done enough cover-up makeup to be confident in putting it on someone else. Mainly the festival is about celebrating life, remembering those whom passed, and welcoming the dead back to the land of the living. Zuri informed him, "Today we're going to watch the parade like I said, and then we're going to honor and care for those who've passed by offering them traditional food, cleaning the shrine, and then sharing a meal and stories of those who've passed all together in or around the shrine." Zuri elaborated even further before putting down the face paint and putting it away. Hawk's stomach knotted itself. "But I don't," Hawks tried to protest since he didn't know anyone that had passed away recently, or well, anyone that he wanted to remember. "It's okay if you don't have any stories. Coming and helping with the shrine will be more than enough." Zuri reassured him, taking his hands in his and helping Hawks back to his feet. "Now, let's go join my friends, Tweety," Zuri told him before he led Hawks out by the hand. Hawks was going to say something else, but his words never came, as once they stepped outside, his mind became consumed with the sights around them. The south side was clearly an old war zone, and maybe he'd worry about the burnt or half-demolished buildings around them, but that had taken a back seat today. Instead, his eyes followed the long garlands of bright orange and yellow flowers strung up, the various candles spreading soft and warm light from everywhere they were set, the hundreds of paper decorations giving even more color to the world around them. The soft music before much louder, and clearly being played live by a group sitting on the crumbled remains of a wall. Their music also accompanied by the sounds of laughter and conversation. And the people, Hawks half wondered if he stepped through the doors into another world. He knew that people could look very different from each other due to the mutations caused by quirks. He heard Zuri ramble on about it weekly, but he hadn't seen so many here tormorphs in one place or dressed so flamboyantly. Everyone seemed to be dressed in the same loud and bright colors around them, and more than one had their faces either fully painted like himself or highlighted with color like Zuri's face had been. Even without sniffing, he could smell the scent of baked goods and cooked meat in the air and making his mouth water. "Oh, Isuku, over here," a girl called, and turning his head, he saw a girl rushing over to them with a pair of boys. All three of them dressed up for the holiday as well. "Hi guys, sorry for taking so long. I had to help Tweety get here," Zuri told Uraraka before the two of them hugged. Then Zuri motioned towards himself. "He's my friend from Kumamoto. I've mentioned him to you guys before," Zuri said, introducing Hawks to his friends. One of the boys, the one wearing a bandana and had his face painted, stepped forward with his hand out. "Hey dude, great to meet ya. Zuri mentioned you before. All good things, I promise." The boy greeted him, beaming at him with an airy chuckle. Hawks shook the offered hand, smiling back at the boy. "Thanks, Zuri's told me about all of you guys as well." Hawks timidly replied, surprised by his own timidness, but he was nervous. The commission had taught him how to interact with young fans as Hawks, but he didn't want to be Hawks today or be Hawks with Zuri's friends. And though he had talked a lot with Zuri as Tweety, Zuri had done most of the talking then, and he found himself unbalanced and unsteady at interacting with someone without some kind of script to go off of. Izuku said, "You couldn't make anything for the altars, but you can help make us frost some cookies over at Minty's." Mame-san made a bunch for the people that couldn't make anything. The girl, Yukai, happily told him as she came over, her smile creasing the web she painted on her face. Hawks felt a calm flutter of excitement over that, happy he would be able to do a little more even if it wasn't made completely by him. "That's a great idea. We can head over after the parade. Let's go. Find a good spot to watch it," Zuri said. Then he started leading them all the way down the street closer to where the people playing music were. Hawks following, still anxious, but excited to go and have fun with them. Izuku softly hummed as he looked through the homework sheets that Bullet Jacker had left for him. He carefully looked through the answers, glad to find that most of the kids knew at least the basics of quirk studies by their second year. Relieved when he saw most of them had correctly guessed that regardless of the type of quirk a person's diet could be very different from the average, and that they could correctly place themselves on the IQ-C ranking system. Both were very simple things, but Izuku had been plenty surprised by how idiotic people could be about one of the most important things out there. The world basically revolved around quirks, and yet, most people would look at him strange if he told them that fire quirked people needed to eat more salt. It gave him a little hope for the future generation, even if some of them would forget about it later after school. All for One's stranglehold on quirk studies was strong. He could only restrict the progress of the field for so long, though. Basic information like this would become common knowledge sooner rather than later. Sighing, Izuku allowed his head to fall back and stare at the ceiling. Some days he wondered just how much All for One had erased, or what discoveries in quirk science that All for One also covered up. Izuku knew a few things that had been like how the old studies from the Dawning that proclaimed that certain quirk people had a small but innate understanding of things connected to their quirks, like math or biology, which were hidden and covered up as anti-mutant propaganda by the two-toes of the time. What other quirk science could be lost to time because of that man? Had someone discovered the real reason that quirks started to appear? What the reason for their sudden and vastly different evolutions their species started to undergo was? The door of the teacher's office opening brought Izuku out of his thoughts, and he watched as Kurosa entered the room, nervously drumming her fingers on the homework in her hands. Her eyes timidly found his, and Izuku sat up straight, and he beckoned her to come over, noticing her anxiety rather easily, and she must have been more nervous than Izuku thought, as she immediately crossed the room over to him and sat down the chair of his neighbor. Well, Izuku doubted that Aizawa would mind all that much since he didn't use his chair as often and wasn't here at the moment. "Something on your mind, Kuro-san?" Izuku asked, gently turning towards her. "Yeah, sorry if I'm taking you away from your work. I know that you're super busy most days, Kuro-san said nervously and began to try and apologize, but Izuku held up his hand. "It's all right, Kuro-san. Go ahead and tell me what's on your mind." Izuku reassured the woman. Kuro-san exhaled, and her shoulders slumped, her head following after, hung forward somewhat. "I've been trying not to think too strong about the dorms, but I can't keep my mind off of them since Niza-san released the plans this morning," Kuro-san told him, rocking her knees side to side as she drummed her fingers even faster. "I mean, I've lived in apartments before. I'm living in one now, actually. And Niza-san has been so generous to stay in 2A's dorms for the first year for me, but I'm still—" Kuro-san's words stopped as she struggled with how to explain what she was feeling. "Overwhelmed," Izuku offered. "Yes," Kuro-san exclaimed, relieved that he understood what she was trying to say. "Like, I love teaching, and the kids here can be great, but I've only been a certified teacher for a few months now. Not to mention, I've never babysat a day in my life, much less be responsible for a whole class outside of school hours before." Kuro-san ranted a little, one of her hands coming up to rest on her face. "I just don't think I'm ready to be that responsible. I forget to do my laundry half the time and would forget to eat on time if it wasn't for my alarms. There's no way I could watch over 20 teenagers." Kuro-san confessed to him, "And that's not even taking into account that I'm passively radioactive if I forget to drink my supplements. There's no way I could be a dorm mother right now," Kuro-san pointed out as well in her misery. Izuku nodded, fully understanding where Kuro-san was coming from. Moving to the dorms would already be a big thing, and for the homeroom teachers, they would be watching over their classes in one of the 33 buildings for the students on top of that. "I understand. The dorms are going to be a big adjustment for all of us. I can't imagine the hassle some of you guys will have to deal with to cancel your current apartments on top of it all," Izuku replied, softly patting Kuro-san's knee. Kuro-san whined at that and slumped in her seat. "Oh, my current landlord is being such a PP about it, threatening to keep my whole deposit and everything since I'm breaking the lease early," Kuro-san complained before rolling her eyes. "As if I haven't been a good tenant and always paid my rent on time," she huffily added under her breath. "If you want, I can have someone I know from my law course look over your lease. Get you some advice at least so you can keep your deposit," Izuku offered. It would be a quick favor that the Vespas could do. They had quite a few lawyers in the family after all, and Izuku knew more than one learned real estate law. "Really? That would be so great, thank you so much, Midoriya," Kuro-san told him, looking like a weight had been taken off her shoulders. "It's not a problem. Izuku said, waving it off. We as turning teachers have to look after each other after all. Izuku jokingly added, getting a soft smile out of Kuro-san. But it fell as something else apparently came to her mind. Speaking of the move, how are you feeling about it? This is probably going to be a pretty big chance for you too. Kuro-san inquired, a hint of worry in her eyes. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck, and his eyes looking away from her. Honestly, I think the move will be harder on my mom than it will be on me. I've been living home part-time already with how I travel for my work, so moving out for the dorms won't be that much of a change. Izuku explained to her. I'm still going to see her twice a week and call her on the other days. But I know that not having me there on Sundays and Thursdays will make her empty nesting even worse. Izuku further elaborated, lazily moving his hand. And maybe I'm just a little nervous about being the one, a dorm mother, Izuku admitted, using the term Kuro-san used earlier, hunching in on himself somewhat. I mean, I don't doubt I can handle living with people my own age, but I'm sure that I might need to lay down the law with them to establish my authority. Izuku said, a touch disappointed. Kuro-san's eyes softened, and she moved her leg out to gently nudge and bump his foot, her version of reaching out and resting out a hand to rest on his shoulder. I'm sorry about your mom. I wish I could help you with some advice there, but, well, you know, I'm a HQC kid. Kurozu-san apologized, looking somewhat guilty about not being more help. Izuku didn't blame her for that. Her sympathy was more than enough. Don't be sorry, Kurozu-san. No one can control that, and I'm sure my mom will find something to help. My uncle plans on coming over with his dog Scampmore. Izuku replied. Twice would have moved in, but their apartment didn't allow dogs that weren't registered as support animals, though he was free to visit all he liked. Though I think you won't have to establish yourself with the kids. You can be pretty intimidating all on your own, Kurozu-san told him. Izuku chuckled. You haven't met a lot of teenagers then. They like to push the boundaries, and since I'll be their age, it will only make them bolder. I can say that for certain. Izuku informed her. He'd been challenged by plenty of students his age, or a little older. Orphans especially would push his buttons when they first met him, something that Izuku never blamed them for since they needed to do so to feel secure themselves and where they stood with him. Just another reason that I'm glad MS-san will be living with them for the coming year. Kurozu-san replied, just remember that you need to be calm, but firm. There is a difference between being stern, strict, and cruel. You can be stern, even strict when it's needed, but never cruel. Izuku said to reassure her. Still need to work on that personally. Kurozu-san muttered, letting her head fall to the side. Izuku pat her knee again. Building backbones are strong to do. It took me forever to be able to reliably defend myself to people outside the red light districts. Izuku commiserated with her. I don't think that'll ever stop sounding weird to me, Kurozu-san commented, and Izuku knew that she meant about the red light districts. Izuku shrugged. She was right. Most people would find the reverse true and would openly stare at him for saying that telling a gang leader to screw off was easier than talking to someone else his own age causally. Thanks for talking with me, Midoriya. This really helped me. Kurozu-san told him. It's no problem, Kurozu-san. I don't mind helping you. You're doing great so far and have been worrying about things that anyone would. Izuku reassured her. Izuku understood how nerve-wracking being a new teacher could be, especially when you were thrown into a more chaotic situation. Even if it wasn't as bad as the districts, it was still pretty different from a normal classroom dynamic. Kurozu-san smiled back at him. Still, thank you. I'm going to finish these papers. Talk with you again tomorrow, Midoriya. Kurozu-san told him before she stood up and with a wave and left for her own desk. See you then. Izuku replied with a wave. Izuku softly exhaled and turned back to the homework he was grading, feeling slightly more calmed after talking with Kurozu-san about something so mundane. It helped him somewhat having so much going on because it helped to distract himself from what wasn't happening on the other side of things. Tenko was coming out of the fog, but he wasn't close to doing anything like trying to sneak out. Leaving the bar on his own for a night was not something that he could see Tenko doing, nor Tenko leaving for more than a few hours unannounced. The coming out of the fog had come with more caution, with Tenko's awareness of all for one's more concerning habits. An unintended consequence of Tenko being less awestruck with his sensei. At least Izuku knew that Iguchi-san would tell him if Tenko did make any spontaneous plans that would keep Tenko out of the bar for a while. since that would be their best time to try and put their rescue plan into action. If it wasn't spontaneous, then Kurogiri would tell All for One, and there was a chance that All for One would keep an eye on Tenko's actions and who he was hanging out with. Still, the wait was killing them all on the inside, though he was glad that he was the only one that saw Tenko in person. Yagi and the others would never be able to take seeing Tenko without acting if they did. Though he did feel glad that there would be a nice and large support system for Tenko to rely on to help Tenko deal with what had happened to him once they did get him out. Hato especially was excited to meet her other cousin and get to know him. Asterisk small mercies, small mercies. Asterisk Izuku told himself, circling an incorrect answer and writing what the student had done wrong. At least he knew that very soon the book he and Mito wrote would be published soon. Izuku wasn't sure when or how long his mom had planned this, but she clearly put her all into it. Izuku didn't even know who told her that about his book, though he suspected that it was either Elmo Vespa or they would have been the only ones in the know about the book and would have been able to tell her, unless his mom had befriended some of the Vespas on her own. He was very embarrassed that she had found out about the book at all, much less planned this big book release party for the day of it being released. At the very least, she had the good sense to keep it all within the close friends and family. The shocked text from his friends Izuku could have done without, though. How was he supposed to explain to them about Mito was the one to write most of it without explaining way too many things that they could not learn about. Izuku did promise to bring them each a copy of his book to soothe their nerves, though he strongly warned them it was a very mature book and mainly revolved around people in their last moments before they were killed by Hiro's negligence. Something he knew would be triggering for Yukai, Gigi, and Awakuin after the fire in the south side. Their silence once he explained that made him feel the urge to pick at his nails. Awakuin's chuckle and comment of, "That sounds like what you'd write. Hope it makes people actually think about the CRP they let people get away with just because their prose had relieved Izuku so much." Katsuki wasn't remotely surprised and told him he'd use a highlighter to mark the grammar errors in the book. He was glad that at least his friends would be understanding of what he had written. His mom and their parents, though, he wasn't sure how they would think about it. So Izuku felt a mix of pressure, embarrassment, and anxiety over how they would take the context and content of his book. If he called Ria and Mito for a confidence boost before everything went down, then that would stay between the three of them. His mom had rented out a space to hold the party since their apartment would be a bit too cramped, and she had left early to decorate with Annie Mitsuchin and Uncle Mazakan. It made calling his doubles easier knowing that his mom wouldn't overhear, but it wouldn't stop him from worrying over today. Strange how he could suddenly become worried over something when the right people actually know about it, and the people in this case were his friends and family. Izuku could only hope that the parents wouldn't look at him too differently once they read the book if they did actually end up reading it and not just leaving it on a shelf in their home. 'Cause he had read Mito's work, and it could get dark, especially with the stories about the children. He approved and had read the final draft of the book, but that didn't change how the stories were the kind that made his guts twist and turn if he thought about them for too long. The chapter about Yukiko-chan and her mother Anya-san was one that Izuku especially was careful not to linger on for his own mental health. Izuku had enough nightmares about Yukiko-chan's death as it was. He really hoped that no one asked about anyone he knew in the South Side because he wasn't sure how he would react to them. He dearly missed those people, but he wasn't ready to talk about them with others yet. His friends would understand, not wanting to speak about the people they were close to or the ones that they missed after an incident. God, why did someone tell his mom? He published the book under a pseudonym for a reason, and this was part of the reason because once the trial for Endeavor came, it wouldn't be tied directly to him. He didn't want all of this fanfare. When Katsuki came over to pick him up to give him the directions to the space, Katsuki couldn't help scoffing at him. "You look like we're going to a funeral." Katsuki signed to him. "Well, I would rather hold one," Izuku quipped back as the two of them headed down to his car. "Drama queen," Katsuki signed, rolling his eyes, and Izuku whacked him on the shoulder because Izuku knew Katsuki waited until he could see his reaction. "Just tell me where we're going so we can get this over with," Izuku scoldingly told the blonde. Katsuki complied, using a text-to-speech app to direct him through the streets. Izuku almost wished the drive was longer so that he could have more time to brace himself, but he wouldn't want that for Katsuki. Izuku could see that Katsuki still wasn't fully comfortable being alone with him. Going to the room his mom rented, Izuku wasn't surprised when his mom was waiting on the other side of the door and had immediately hugged him as soon as he stepped inside. Izuku couldn't help smiling and hugged her back. "Hi, Mom." Izuku greeted. His mom kissed his forehead, then pulled him into the room, and Izuku saw the party they had set up for him. It wasn't anything that fancy. Some streamers and balloons dotted the room with more color, and a table of food and gifts pushed over against a wall. His friends and Suddy-chan were happy to throw handfuls of confetti once his mom turned him around, and they exclaimed, "Congratulations." Izuku snorted and held his arms open, Yukai and Suddy-chan diving in to hug him as well. "Thanks for coming on such short notice, guys," Izuku told them. Yukai pulled away and smacked him on the arm. "It wouldn't have been short notice if someone told us they were going to be releasing a book," Yukai said, throwing him some shade, and Izuku chuckled awkwardly as he avoided her eyes while rubbing the back of his neck. "Speaking of, I believe that you promised us each a copy, Zuri." Awakuen remained him. Izuku sighed and made a bit of a show as he pulled off his bag and started pulling out copies of Heroic Sacrifice for each of his friends. He and Mito settled on a toned-down cover, mainly black with silhouettes of heroes in gray, the title in dark red metallic kanji down the middle of the cover for the Japanese edition that would not hit the market yet. Awakuen took the first copy and upon reading the cover snorted, "Zuri, dude, I thought you were yanking my chain?" Before he started chuckling. Izuku merely shrugged back, knowing exactly what Awakuen meant. "It's not my fault you thought I was joking about my pen name was Mr. Green," Izuku told him. "Did you really?" Suddy-chan questioned, moving to hover over his shoulder and look at the next copy of the book that Izuku was still holding. "Zuri, that is so corny," Awakuen replied. "Why? Is it because his name has the kanji for Midori in it, and his hair?" Suddy asked, since apparently they and Fumikage didn't seem to be in on the joke. As Izuku was about to explain, Katsuki sked and answered first. "There is this ancient as F board game. You've probably seen a copy of it somewhere before potty, and it has a bunch of weird but names for its player tokens. One of the idiots in it is called Mr. Green." "Ah," Fumikage understood, nodding while Suddy-chan let out a long ooh. Before whispering in Katsuki's ear, "I still don't get it. Brain-dead penguins, IF swear." Katsuki grumbled, face-palming, and held out his hand for his copy. Izuku dutifully gave him a book and continued to hand them out to everyone that wanted one. At which point Annie Mitsuchin stopped holding back and walked over to him, roughly tousled his hair. "I can't believe you try to hide this from us. Do you know how proud we are of you, Izuku?" Annie Mitsuchin asked him teasingly. "More than when I first graduated college," Izuku guessed, making Annie Mitsuchin burst out laughing. "So, demon much?" Auntie Mitsuchin confirmed, then hugged him as tightly as she could, making it feel more like a headlock. Uncle Mazakan nodded, gently rubbing his head. "This is a very big milestone, Izuku, and I'm glad we could share this with you," he softly told him, making Izuku feel warm inside, and he melted a little. "It really is. It's really strong to break into the publishing world locally. It takes Kimiko years to make her novels, and you're already selling books on multiple continents." Aditi-san, one of the Tokoyamis, commented. Her wife Kimiko-san nodded. "It is a massive achievement, Izuku-kun," she told him with a soft smile. Izuku returned the smile, but felt bad deep down. He knew that one of the big reasons that he'd been able to publish in so many places was because, and the Vespas helped him using their money and influence. It was another reason that Izuku hadn't wanted people to know he was the main author of the book. The book was important, dreadfully so, but that didn't make him feel like he hadn't cheated people like Kimiko that had to work so strong to get published locally. "Thank you, Tokoyami-san," Izuku replied, gripping the strap of his messenger bag, mainly to avoid picking at his nails. Izuku thought he had gotten over the habit most days, but there were times like this one where he felt the old urge and had to actively keep himself from falling right back into it. "Do you mind telling us about your book? I'd love to hear how you came up with yours," Kimiko-san inquired. Izuku rubbed his neck to keep his hands away from each other. "Well, it's probably not as thought out as you think it is, Tokoyami-san. I first considered making it years ago, a few months after I started tutoring people." Izuku fumbled as he began to explain a tame version of why he wrote Heroic Sacrifice. It just sort of came together by itself a year or two back, and I found the time in between everything and wrote it," Izuku said, losing his train of thought, or even where he was going with his words. Sensing his discomfort, Awakun came over and threw his arm over his shoulders. "Geez, Zuri, between everything you were doing, you were also writing a book too. Next you're going to tell us that you're also writing a second book." Awakun joked. Izuku's heart dropped into his stomach, and he avoided everyone's eyes. When he hadn't said anything, Awakun lost some of his joviality and instead stared at him along with the rest of his friends. "You've got to be F with me." Katsuki signed at him. "Hey, you haven't had to deal with nearly hundreds of people having all sorts of medical issues because of the misinformation about quirk dietary problems, Katsuki," Izuku pointedly told his old friend. Katsuki flipped him off while Awakun gasped. Zuri, be real with me right now," Awakun said, turning Izuku towards him and holding him by his shoulders. "Do you get any sleep?" Awakun asked. "Yes, Awakun. I promise I sleep and get enough sleep every night too," Izuku assured his friend. "Are you sure?" Gigi asked, and Izuku gave him a look. "Yes, guys, I do," Izuku replied, pretending to be annoyed as he again confirmed he was getting enough sleep. "You better," Yukai told him with a bit of a huff, crossing her arms. "Don't forget, we'll be going to you. Come next April so we can, and we will make sure you go to sleep every night," Yukai sternly promised. At the mention of the dorms, Izuku saw his mom wince, but she smiled still and gently put her hand on Yukai's shoulder. "I'm glad to know that you'll have people in the dorms to look out for you there," his mom commented. Izuku knew his mom's words were bittersweet, but he also knew better than to point it out either. He had offered for her to move into the apartments for the teachers' families. She would hardly be the only mother that was moved in by a teacher. He knew more than a few would be moving in their able-bodied parents as well. But surprisingly, his mom had said no and instead chose to remain in their old apartment. Apparently not ready to leave the place, and Izuku could understand. Leaving the apartment was something that left an odd taste in his mouth he couldn't quite place. But it would be worth it. Izuku would make sure of it. Now he just needed to make sure to get through this book release party and hope that the people attending would not ask him too many pressing questions. Tomira hummed as he idly looked through the page he brought up on his laptop, searching through the website for some loot for his party this coming event season. He wouldn't be able to get them anything in the same class as Deku's loot drops, but that didn't mean he couldn't get them both something that would be helpful. Unfortunately, the item descriptions weren't helpful in determining the exact boost that the items had or gave once equipped. He could read between the lines, but Tomira still disliked the vague wording of the boosts. At least Tomira knew what items and bonus stats he needed to find for the two of them. Green had some nice coats with cold resistance, but Tomira had plans for buying a nicer one with a larger cold resistance and a charisma bonus if possible. There were some modders out there that could make some custom gear skins that would be more reflective of his party members' tastes. He did recall that their kid had asked if the shoes he wore came with a Lucario theme instead of his Yamper one. So he already had a base idea was just what their kit would love to have on his new gear for casual play. He just needed to find the perfect accompanied character roster for the theme. Deku had placed a lot of thought into the characters he added to his loot, and he wouldn't skimp on either of their gear. The mods for Green, though, were going to be a bit more complicated, though. Because he wanted the loot, he got them to be either practical or for casual play, and the casual gear would be rather easy, but finding custom practical gear would be a touch harder for both of them. Green was an engineer class in IRL, with a subclass as a Rouge, something he was very proud of his ranger for managing so well, but that left him a bit stumped in getting practical stuff. He was not fully familiar with the programming track of the engineer class that Green picked. Green complained about some of his tools, but that didn't give him a great idea of which ones would be useful or even the good kind of tools. Price did not mean it was the best option for his ranger. Currently, his best idea would be to have a custom pair of goggles made for Green that would protect his eyes and maybe have a night vision option. However, most of the mods focused more on the theme of the gear they were making and not the bonus that could be added. And he hadn't found a theme that wouldn't be too bulky, making its debuffs too much hassle for proper usage in the day-to-day. Miles' practical gear was easier to find, but came with a trade-off of picking which one would specifically be the right one for their kit. It felt like choosing which of the EV evolutions should be the first one picked up if they were all so easily accessed. Miles had plans to be in the hero class, but there were a lot of subclasses and Miles hadn't locked into which one he wanted yet. The gear he gave the kit would likely influence which subclass he chose. He had a few thrown out already just based on Miles' current alignment. As fun as it would be to have all of their party as Rouges in class or subclass, Miles wouldn't hack it in the heroic subclass of Rouges. He knew that the hero Rouges handled things that would be too much for Miles to mentally handle. But an engineer subclass wouldn't be good for him either. Having an interest in tech was different from being able to work the field, and he could see that Miles would be easily frustrated over all of the actual work that came with the class. He was torn on whether the Berserker subclass would also be too much violence for their kit, but didn't toss it aside completely yet. Hence his current surfing through the net for better ideas for the loot he could give and some stronger leanings for Miles' future subclass route. He did leave pins on a few pages with gear aimed towards the fighter and monk classes as a backup, since they most aligned with his current EXP points collected and routes chosen. Tomira still had time to browse the shops. The event season wouldn't reach its peak for another 20 days. He'd need to ask Deku for some more investigation EXP though, so he could better sniff out what subclass Miles would fit best in. A timer went off on his phone, and Tomira sighed, putting his laptop in sleep mode, and set it on his desk before leaving his room to get himself something to drink. Even if his health and status bar were doing better, the imposed breaks were annoying. Still, he was glad his skin was doing better and that it didn't flake off or scratch himself as much. The bath bombs did make up for the usual boring bathing cutscenes, though. Walking down to the bar, Tomira walked behind the bar, carefully moving around Giri to find the correct bottles and made himself the correct beverage. "You're getting better with your mixing, MSTR, Tomira," Giri mentioned, and Tomira puffed his CHSD a little, proud that he had been getting better with this skill tree. He was so glad that Deku pointed out how his favorite games all shared a similar skill tree, and that he could have Giri help train him in it since Giri was already a MSTR of it. It was surprisingly easy with Giri's help as a tutorial, and he did love the mini-games it opened up to him in IRL. Tomira sat down at the bar and considered whether he wanted to make some food as well when the TV gave a warning hum that it was going to turn on. Somehow, in an instant, all of Tomira's good mood was shot down. The awful creeping sensation that now followed their interactions made Tomira's tongue feel heavy in his mouth. The image of Sensei came across the screen, revealing the man's scarred face and parts of the machines, keeping his sensei's many status effects from ending his character as well. "Ah, it seems that I have tuned in at an opportune time," Sensei commented with a grin. "Saves Kirojiri the time of fetching you from your room, Tomira," Sensei teasingly said, making Tomira's stomach drop even further. Normally, when Sensei was looking to talk with him, it meant that either a mission had come up or it was time for one of the doctor's very infuriating mini-games. Neither would be good. The doctor's mini-games would always take weeks, and the hints of what he needed to do were very unhelpful now that he could tell the hints were just meaningless dribble. A mission, on the other hand, was one that would probably be better if only just a little bit. Killing people could be messy, and before he wouldn't have blinked twice. He still could do that, but it would be the nightmares afterwards that would make it strong to maintain his sleep bar. The nightmares were probably an unexpected debuff of Quirkless Ally. It was the only reason he could think of why they would only pop up now after all of these years. He really wished those cutscenes were skippable. Watching Deku melting away under his hands always made his sanity bar dip dangerously low, and that was before the dreams got worse, and the ashy pulp of Deku reshaped itself to different Nomus afterwards. "Oh," Tomira muttered, playing off his discomfort as bored annoyance by putting his face in a free hand. "You gonna give me my seasonal loot drop early, Sensei?" Tomira asked, lightly scratching his neck since his not doing that would look suspicious. Sensei chuckled. "I suppose you could look at it that way, Tomira, though I believe you will be much more excited for what I have to tell you," Sensei informed him. Officially thrown off guard, Tomira sat up a little straighter. Sensei would not say that if it was a mission or one of the doctor's mini-games. Sensei knew and acknowledged that he hated the mini-games and would have been apologetic about it, and promised him a bigger loot drop for event day. And if it was a mission, that he would still apologize for how boring things were and tell him about the mission as a way for stress relief. This was unknown territory. "You see, Tomira, it is finally time for you to begin our main quest line, and I have a little gift for you to help you along the way," Sensei told him with mirth. Tomira's eyes went wide, his mouth falling open slightly. He was going to start the main quest. After all of this time, they were going to start the main quest. The one to tear apart hero society. They were going to start the quest without Sensei even telling him how the quest was supposed to end. Sure, in a lot of role-playing games you are not supposed to know everything or even the direct results of what each action you take has, but the players still had some idea of what the end goal was. And he still didn't know what his Sensei's end goal of tearing hero society apart was. Well, Sensei did mention that he would be giving him something that would help him. Maybe it was the quest's full storyline or some kind of plan they would be trying to follow for an end result. What kind of gift? Tomira tentatively asked, making Sensei grin. Well, Tomira, I'm sure you know how I feel about the commercial nature of heroes. Much less their stranglehold on the power in our country, Sensei reminded him. And Tomira obediently nodded without speaking. It was one of the few points that still comforted him about his Sensei, that he and Deku both agreed that the heroes of today were more like prize cattle than humans working a very tough and dangerous job. And he personally hated how people looked at heroes as if they were untouchable angels, beings of impeccable morals. A hatred that had only been reinforced once he saw that the heroes were so cruel to Deku. And the best way to unroot their ties and put them in their proper place would be to shake the public's trust in them, no? Sensei asked. Tomira felt his guts turn about how much the question made him feel baited into answering the way he could see his Sensei wanted him to. Yeah, Tomira replied. So, the best way to do that would be to show everyone the truth of how the heroes truly are. Sensei told Tomira. He wondered how they were going to do that. Maybe gathering years' worth of evidence of heroes wronging the people. Tomira knew of more than one place where they could get the footage. Tomira would like to see the public's outcry once they were forced to watch one of their darling heroes assaulting and falsely accusing civilians because of their quirks, or even abusing their status to force their fans into doing something awful. Deku would probably be proud of him too for doing that too. And what better way to do that than to show how recklessly the heroes are treating the children that are so lovingly put into their care. Sensei said with an even larger grin and a chuckle that sent a chill down his spine. Tomira stared at Sensei, glad that the man couldn't see the brief flicker of horror on his face. He couldn't be reading his Sensei's intentions right. His Sensei wasn't a saint. Tomira had long accepted that fact. But he just couldn't believe that his Sensei would want him to attack a school of children, a group of kids that could be just like Miles. To harm a bright-eyed kid that just wanted to help like his party member. His kid. His Sensei could not be going with this the way he feared his Sensei was. It will be such a scandal when the world's best hero school will be publicly known for a villain attack where their students were harmed, or how delicious the outrage would be if one of the students died during the attack. How else could they react when the parents start demanding answers for their children's BLD? Sensei teasingly asked him, grinning. Tomira, though, felt something in his heart utterly shatter as he stared in open disbelief at Sensei. Sensei wanted him to attack UA, the school that was protecting Deku and he knew was Miles's dream school to attend next year. The school where so many of Deku's students were willing to openly stand by Deku's side and defend him from the bigoted heroes in the system. Sensei wanted him to hurt those kids. To kill them for what? Prove a point. Tomira knew that it would make the majority of NPCs lose faith in the heroes. It would probably absolutely shake the very core of the country, if not the world, if he did kill some of you. A's students. But Tomira couldn't do that. The idea of it alone made him feel wrong in ways that he didn't know he could. How could he ever look Deku in the eye after doing something like that, knowing that Deku would know he was behind the attack instantly? How the F was he supposed to explain what he'd done? Much less ever be in the same room as Miles without wanting to throw up from the guilt of what he'd done. And if Miles found out what he'd done, his kid would never forgive him. Of course, Tomira, I would never expect you to do this alone. You've grown quite a bit these last couple of years, but attacking you, A, is still quite above your current skill level. Sensei mused on, waving his hand carelessly and moving on despite Tomira's silence. But there's this old joke that I'm sure you know of, Sensei, before he called out for Giri. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this. Sensei quoted as Giri opened a portal, and Tomira felt tense, expecting a Nomu to leave the portal. But what came out was so much worse. A young blonde boy timidly was forced out of the mist, his steps unsteady as if he never went through one of Giri's portals before now, and he looked rather terrified as he held his stomach. He could not be any older than Deku, and immediately Tomira could tell from the shoes the boy was wearing that he was quirkless. "This is Aoyama Yuga," Sensei said, introducing the trembling, pale boy. "Think of him as a pawn. He'll be our eyes and ears inside you, and next year after he passes the entrance exam. Until then, though, he'll need to stay with you." Sensei informed him, and Aoyama ducked his head, shamefully. "Do make sure not to break him before then." Sensei jokingly ordered, no doubt referencing how he used his quirk on villains that Sensei had sent before and annoyed Tomira in the past. A small whimper from Aoyama, making it clear the boy also knew what Sensei meant, and the sound made Sensei chuckle. The sound another stab to his heart, as Sensei's cruelty was so boldly rubbed in his face. "I'll check on how he's settling in later. I have a meeting with the doctor that I need to get back to. Play nice with your new toy Tomira." Sensei teased before the TV cut out and went dark, leaving Tomira to stew in the all that had been dropped so suddenly on him. Alone with the boy about to start crying at any moment, and a silently watching Giri, and Tomira sitting at the bar unsure what he should do with himself. Unable to take his eyes off of Aoyama as his mind raced. He couldn't do this. He couldn't accept this quest no matter how much he worked for it. Tomira could not go through with something like this. But this wasn't a game. Tomira couldn't push a button and make this whole situation go away and just forget about it. And if he refused to go through with it, he knew deep down that Sensei would never accept that. Sensei would make him do it regardless, or Sensei would just replace him with someone that wouldn't have his newfound hang-ups. Someone that would not hesitate to rip through miles without blinking. The very thought made his tongue feel like it was covered in the ashy bloody pulp of one of his victims, and he had to hold back from gagging. What the hell was he supposed to do? A soft sound of Aoyama's tears hitting the ground somehow cut through his thoughts and brought his mind back to the boy standing in front of him. A boy that was probably even more terrified than Tomira could imagine. His mind immediately being reeled back to the day of the sports festival and how Broken Miles looked that day as he cried. Tomira's hands clenched. "Giri, go make me something. I don't care what, I'm hungry," Tomira told Giri, his voice feeling so thick as he spoke. "As you wish, Mstr Tomira," Giri replied, disappearing to the kitchen and leaving him alone with Aoyama. "Aoyama, come over here now," Tomira ordered. Aoyama gulped and hesitated, but ultimately walked over, clearly absolutely terrified of getting within arm's distance, but more scared of disobeying him. "Look at me," Tomira said, since the boy hadn't dared to raise his head, and Tomira knew this interaction would need eye contact to make his dialogue choices really land. Watery blue eyes met his. The fear there deeply etched itself into Tomira's heart. Maybe it was another side effect of quirkless Li that neither he nor Deku knew of before, or perhaps it was how easy it was to see Miles and Aoyama despite the boy's foreign features. But some distant part of his mind could not stand for it. "You were quirkless before, weren't you?" Tomira inquired. The boy immediately winced, and his shoulders hunched together. Aoyama nodded his head, very slightly, his arms drawing tighter around his stomach. "How'd Sensei get his hands on you?" Tomira asked. Aoyama looked away from him, his hands tightly clenched. "My parents don't want that kind of life for me," Aoyama timidly answered, his voice very soft and deeply accented. Tomira scowled, already able to see what must have happened. The boy's parents must have gone to Sensei in order to get Aoyama a quirk of some kind, and of course Sensei would take advantage of them. "Is Sensei holding them over your head?" Tomira guessed, not needing the boy's answer to know it was true, but Aoyama's nod was appreciated, nonetheless. It would make things more complicated then. He had no doubts that securing Aoyama's parents would be a necessity to keep the boy alive and earn his trust, a loyalty mission like for the Mass Effect trilogy. But there must be a way to get through this. It was just going to SCK, and Tomira would need to be very careful with all of his choices and how to spend his resources now. "I know that Sensei has been very clear about your role and what you have to do to keep your parents alive," Tomira stated, standing up from the stool he was on. Aoyama ducking his head instinctively and flinching as he stopped himself from stepping back and away from him. "But I have no intention in attacking you, and we will not allow Sensei to either," Tomira whispered to Aoyama, just in case. Giri was in the kitchen, but he didn't need to risk something like this. The boy's head snapped back up to look at him, mouth open to ask something, and Tomira covered Aoima's mouth with his hand, the boy freezing. Tomira watched as fear bled into confusion, no doubt expecting to fall apart with Tomira's bare hand on his face. Be quiet. Giri will keep this a secret, but he's a Nomu and will need plausible deniability if Sensei directly asks him. Tomira warned under his breath. Giri was already keeping Deku under wraps, but he didn't want to risk this being one of the things that Giri had to tell Sensei. Aoima's face didn't change, and his confusion was still front and center. Look, I don't have enough time to explain everything to you right now, but you don't want to hurt anyone and want your parents free, right? Tomira questioned. Aoima nodded rapidly. And I don't want to attack a bunch of hero brats, so we'll form a party for now, and we'll pretend that we're going along with it for now, until I figure out some way to get us both out of this mess. Tomira told the boy. Disbelief was clear on the boy's face. Tomira knew that Aoima's reaction was no doubt deserved. He'd earned himself a reputation. Just do your best to keep your head down and pass along as little as you can get away with. I'll handle everything else, got it? Tomira questioned. Aoima nodded again, still afraid, but Tomira could see that there was a bit of hope deep down. And the longer that Tomira saw the fear, the more it rankled something in his chest. Tomira removed his hand from Aoima's mouth and gently ruffled Aoima's hair with the same hand. And know that you can come to me for anything. We are a party now, and I will always take care of my party members no matter what. We are both in this together now, and I will have your back, Aoima. Tomira promised the boy. Aoima's lip trembled, his hands clenching his shirt. Tomira didn't hesitate to pull Aoima to him and let the boy quietly cry into his chest, resting both of his hands on the back of Aoima's head to avoid his quirk destroying Aoima's clothes. Tomira resting his chin on the top of the boy's head, giving Aoima a small part of the shelter that Deku had given him so often since they first met. Aoima, I have been threatened and spent most of my life as one of AFO's playthings, expecting at any moment he might turn me into a Nomu, and now I must infiltrate a foreign hero school to allow myself and my classmates to be attacked by the same madman Tomira. F that SHD, I'm adopting you. You'll match my other new companion Aoima. Aren't you supposed to be threatening me too? Tomira, what part of you are my party now don't you get? Kurojiri returns with 2 plates and a drink, passing the second plate and glass to Aoima, who is surprised but thankful for the food. Oboro, what do you think our new son's class would be? Kurojiri, bard, with a warlock subclass and noble background. Oboro, well, that would be interesting. Thank you for joining us on this journey through what if Villain Deku became a teacher at U.A. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Bloomerbill for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on fanfiction.net for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.